In this section of videos, we're going to be looking at the purchasing module. And if we hit our applications drop down and we go into purchasing, I can see here in my transactions section, I have several different workflow definitions set up. So I have a few different options for order, for shipping, for invoicing. And let's say you have, yours is probably going to look a little bit different than mine. You're not going to have quote, order, shipping, invoice, return here. Well, you may possibly, depending on how many you have set up, but you might just have a list of your transaction definitions. And maybe you want to turn some of them off. So maybe there's some of them that you're never going to use. To do that, you would go to the Setup tab within Purchasing, hit Configuration. And within the configuration, then you'll go to Documents, and you can just check off any of the transaction definitions that you do not think that you're going to use. So there may be some out of the box ones that you're never, right off the bat, you're never using that. Like you might not ever need purchase requisition. Whatever it is that you don't need, you would just inactivate it here. And then if you did have additional information set up here for it, it's not going to lose that. It does come back after the fact. So I'm going to turn off purchase requisition. I'm going to save that. And then if I refresh my screen and take a look at my purchasing module again, under the All tab, I actually don't have that quote option anymore because I turned that off. So it's in Setup Configuration on the Documents Configuration tab. Here is where you'll turn off any of the transaction definitions that you do not think that you will use. It just declutters your list a little bit if you wanted to turn any of them off. So next up, we're going to go into the Purchasing module, Setup tab, and we're going to take a look at the transaction definitions. So just to show you what each one of the tabs means within your transaction definitions, I'm just going to select the subcontract invoice. So I'm going to edit beside that. And on this main screen, the General tab, down here in the print section is where you tell the system which print document template you want to use for this specific workflow. So for my subcontract invoice, which document do I want to be able to print out of the system whenever I use that transaction? So if you have some specific invoice that you want to use, then you would have to put that into the system into Platform Services, Printed Document Templates. And then, so in Printed Document Templates, you would hit Add. You would have the template obviously in your computer to upload, and you're going to choose purchasing as your application, and then what order type is it. So if it's an invoice, you're going to want to say that it's an invoice. And then once you've that saved into the system, when you go back to your transaction definition, it should appear in that drop down on your General tab. So for some reason, I don't have any in the system, but if you had, they would appear here in the drop down. And you would select which printed document template you want to use for whenever you create a subcontract invoice in the system. And then in your entity settings, you can actually have a different document template depending on which entity you use. So if I had multiple entities, I could come in here and I could say for my Timberline GC entity, I want to use a different document template. You can also have a different numbering sequence. So General tab, in the print section is where you apply the printed document template. And then on the entity tab is where you can say that you want to use a different one by entity. But if you're not bothered about the entity and you just want to use the same template across the board, do it on the General tab. Okay, so in our posting configuration, then here is where we're telling the system which GL account we want to hit when we're putting in transactions. So if I duplicate my screen, I'm going to right click and hit duplicate, and I'm going to go into a transaction. So I'm going to go to purchasing, and I'm just going to go into subcontract invoice. You'll see within the purchasing module, there is nowhere down here on your entry screen to go to hit GL account. There's no coding that you can put in for GL account. So the way that Intacct works is if you're using the purchasing module, the order entry module, you're going to use items to get to your GL account. So your items are set up that you have a list of items here, And then your items are linked to an item GL group. So within each item, you should have an item GL group tagged. So let's say for material, if I click edit on that, the item GL group that this is associated with is my materials GL group. So then on my transaction definition, I'm saying anytime an item that is part of item GL group materials is used, this is the GL account that I want that to go to. So materials, cost of sales, materials. This is really just a brief overview just to remind you. I know you've gone over this already, but here is where you link to your GL account. So items are linked to a GL group, item GL group, and then the item GL group is put in on the posting configuration. And this is where you tell the system, this is the GL account that I want to hit whenever I'm using items that are part of that GL group. Okay. The security tab, then you can tighten up security around your transaction definitions when you go live. So you can say that you don't want any editing, you don't want any deleting, and then you can also have specific people that have permissions to these transaction definitions. So let's say for a subcontract invoice, you only want certain users to be able to create subcontract invoices, then you can do that here. You can say deny everyone and only allow certain users, or you can allow groups of users if you have user groups set up. You can also say that you only want transactions to be created within the entity or only within top level, depending on what sort of setup you have going on. That is something that you may want to do. And then for your create policy, you can say that someone can create a new document. So let's say for an invoice, do you only ever want someone to create an invoice when they're converting? So let's say a subcontract has to be in the system and you have to convert from a subcontract to create an invoice. Or do you want to allow people to be able to create a subcontract invoice without a subcontract being in there? So that's what this does. So there are the tabs that you have within your transaction definitions. That's just kind of an overview of what they mean. I know that it has been covered before, but just a refresher on that. And then, of course, when you're in this screen as well, if you hit display workflows, you'll see how that all works together. So you would create a purchase order. A purchase order then gets converted to a purchasing invoice. If you have a return that goes against your invoice, subcontracts get converted to subcontract invoice, and then you can create a subcontract credit memo if you need to off of a subcontract invoice. So hitting display workflows there will show you the way that that lays out. And then obviously purchasing setup configuration on the documents tab, you can turn off any of the workflows that you do not want to see here on your main screen. Next up, we're going to enter in some transactions. So to do that, I'm going to go down to my entity level. I'm going to go to Timberline GC and I'm going to enter in a subcontract. So once that loads up, I'm going to go to my purchasing module. I'm going to go to order, and yours might just have subcontract here, which is totally fine. I just have a lot of transaction definitions, which is why these are looking like this. So for subcontract, then I can click it and then I can add from there, or wherever I see this little green plus button on the menu, I can add directly from the menu. So once I get in here, then anything with the red asterisk is required. I'm going to put in my vendor, and my pay to, return to, and terms are going to default in from my vendor setup. And my due date will also default based off of the terms. So I need to put in a project. I'm going to try the sugar shop here. And then anything with the red asterisk is required. If you want to put in a default retainage percentage, you can do that here. You can also do that at the vendor level, but it's more common that it would happen at the subcontract level. These different fields here can be turned off or on in your transaction definition. They do come collapsed like this, so if you don't actually have anything to enter into them, then it's not that big of a deal. You're probably better off to have them turned on so that you do have that additional information. And this info that you put in here then can be accessed on a document template as well. So sometimes if there's a field that you're not using, we can repurpose it for something else. So you have the option to apply defaults then to all of your lines. So let's say you wanted to make every line here billable. So let's say we put in the sugar shop, customer, the department, billable, and then I'm going to apply the defaults, and then that's going to default in on every line. Down here then, anything with a red asterisk is required. You do have to put in item. You're required to enter an item because that is how you're telling the system which GL account you want to go to. So on Sugar Shop then, I would put in cost code, cost type, and then my item is going to default in from my cost type. If you wanted to move around this entry screen, you can hit more actions, edit entries layout, and you can move it around however makes the most sense for you. When you have it looking the way that you want, you would apply the layout changes to all form views. So whether you're creating, editing, or just simply viewing a transaction, and hit save layout. And then for your conversion type for a subcontract, it should be price. You're going to want your subcontracts to be conversion type of price. And then your extended price is the cost of your subcontract. So I'm going to put in $25,000 for my subcontract for Ace Drywall on Sugar Shop, and my default retainage percentage is 10 here, which is coming from where I put it in up here. You could have several lines on this, of course. And then I'm just going to post. And this might take a second. Okay, so that subcontract now has posted, and the next step in the process would be to convert the subcontract to a subcontract invoice. So you put in the subcontract for the full amount of the committed cost that is for that project. So for the duration of that project, what was the full amount? Now you've received an invoice from that subcontractor, and you're going to convert that to an invoice. So they've completed, let's say, $10,000 of the $25,000 contract. When I come in here, then anything with the red asterisk is required. Vendor document number is required at this point. So Intacct assumes you have an invoice number at this stage. And then down here on the entry screen, you're just going to come over to price, and you're going to say how much of this price are you converting. So they've completed $10,000, and I'm still holding my 10% retainage. So I'm going to convert $10,000 worth of the subcontract. Obviously, these other fields you can put information into. If you have an invoice that you receive from them, you can attach it in here and you can post that. So that subcontract invoice then posts, and it automatically gets pushed through to accounts payable when it posts. So if I go over to accounts payable and I look at my bills, I'm going to see an invoice there for Ace Drywall. So Ace Drywall subcontract invoice has automatically pushed over to AP when I converted that subcontract to a subcontract invoice. And then if I go back to purchasing and I look at my subcontract invoice, let's just take a look at the posting details on that. So I'm going to hit view, and then I'm going to go to posting details. And this has gone to my accounts payable journal. So I've created the invoice off of the subcontract invoice. So it reversed the $10,000 out of my sub journal. So I had originally posted the subcontract into my sub journal or my sub book. And then when I created this transaction, it automatically reversed that out and then sent it over to accounts payable. So I have $9,000 going to accounts payable, and I have $1,000 going to retainage payable, which is exactly what I would have wanted to happen. So that's my journals. And then the last thing that I want to look at is if I go back to my order, go back to my subcontract, how do I put in a subcontract change order now against this subcontract? So there's two ways to do that. You can do it just by going into order and hit subcontract change order, and you can do it from there, but that's actually a more difficult way of doing it because you have to link it to your original document. So what you'll do is you'll go into the subcontract, hit edit, and then you're going to hit more actions, new change, and you're going to do subcontract change order. So once you come into the subcontract, hit more actions, new change, subcontract change order. And then it's going to pull in the information from your subcontract so you don't have to remember that. See, it links it to your source document. And then down here on this line, you're just going to say, this is price and it's $500. My extended price is $500. And you can hold retainage as well on your change orders. If you don't want to, you can zero that out. So I have a $500 change order. I'm going to post that. And then that brings me in and I can see now I have a change order created for my Ace Drywall subcontract. And if I go back to my subcontract and view it, I'll see a change in the change document tab. Now I have my $500 change order created against that subcontract. Okay, so this is for my sugar shop job. So I'm going to go over to projects and I'm going to take a look at a nice tab that gives you an overview of commitments for your projects. So if I come into my project information, I have a purchasing commitments tab here. And if I look at that, I should have, my Ace Drywall down here. So I have my $25,000 original amount. I have a $500 change order against that subcontract, and I've invoiced out $10,000. If there was a payment against it, I would see that here as well. So this purchasing commitments tab is a really nice overview of your subcontracts purchase orders within your project. And if you're not seeing that tab, then it is in your project's setup configuration that you would turn that on. So you probably want to do that at top level, go to top level, hit projects, setup, configuration, and it's down towards the bottom. Here in this additional options, you have the option to turn on a bunch of different tabs within your project setup screen. And it is this purchasing commitments tab. So if you don't have that on, that's a really nice one to be able to see like a snapshot of that project, commitments against that project. So I would recommend turning that on. So let's say you have created a subcontract invoice and you have a credit against that invoice. What we recommend doing is using reverse conversion to make sure that that amount is available for conversion again within the original document. So now let's take a look at approvals within the purchasing module. So from your applications drop-down, navigate to purchasing, setup tab, and configuration. And it's about halfway down here. So approvals here, enable purchasing approval to turn it on. And then you can require a vendor for approval. And then let's say you have a transaction that's been approved and it gets modified. What do you want to happen in that scenario? So do you want to require a reapproval? Do you want it to be if there's only line amount changes or any line or subtotal amount changes? So you have different options here with that. And then for your email notifications, you can check that off so that when there are transactions in the system to be approved, the approver will get an email notification to say, come on in and take a look at these transactions. So once you have it enabled, then you have your approval policies here and you can hit manage, which will bring up this purchasing approval policies page. And you can add here and then select all your different types of transaction definitions. So they do just have to be either quote, order, or invoice for approvals to be set up on them, but you can have a different approval policy by transaction definition. But you can only have one approval policy per definition, but you can have, a different one for each. And you can do approvals whether you are business user, project manager user, or employee user. So that's good to know. You can have employee users in the system that do approvals. So let's say I choose vendor invoice here as my transaction definition, and then down here I have my different rule types. So value approval, pretty straightforward. If you select value approval, you have to hit edit over here on the manage. And then this is going to go by different levels, which are permissions that get assigned to roles. And then those roles are assigned to your users. So let's say for all of my vendor invoices that are between 1 cent and $50,000, I want them to go to an approver with level 1 approval permissions. And then anything over $50,000, I want it to go to someone with level 2. And then let's say 500,000, anything over 500,000, I want it to be level 3. And I want at least 2 people to be approving anything over $500,000 in the system. So just to give you an idea of what these levels are then in your roles. So I'm in the company module looking at roles. And let's just look at the admin role and open up our subscriptions over here, which are the actual permissions. Down here on the purchasing module, if I click permissions, I will see in here that there is purchasing approval levels. So you would give permission for whichever level you want to the role that's applied to the user that you want to be doing approvals. And you also want to give them approved purchase transaction list. So that's your value approval. It's based off levels. You also have value approval progressive. And basically that's just going to be like a step-up process. So if you have, the same setup as we saw before with level 1 was up to 5,000, level 2 was up to 50,000, level 3 was up to 500,000. If you have a $500,000 bill, then level 1 approver is going to approve it first, level 2 approver is going to approve it next, and then it's going to go to a level 3 approval. So it's going to progress through all of those different stages for approval. So then value approval department then is based on the submitter of the transaction, and your value approval transaction department is based on the department that is tagged within the transaction. So there are your value approvals. We also have user level approvals. So you can hit user level and then you can go to a specific user for approvals for that specific definition. So I could choose Lisa Campbell, let's say, for my vendor invoice to go to her, or I could pick a user group level. And if you do have user groups set up in the system, then they would appear here in the dropdown. So let's say you had a group set up specifically for vendor invoice approvals. It's going to go to one of them or all of them, and then someone would have to approve it. Okay, so now let's look at department approval. So department approval is going to be the manager of the department that the employee who submitted the transaction is assigned. So if you are the person putting in the transaction, whichever department that you're assigned on your employee file, whoever the manager is of that department gets the approvals when you submit transactions with this type of approval policy. So employee manager approval then is the manager of the employee who submitted the transaction within their employee file. And these are quite similar, but they're a little bit different. So I'll put a note at the end of this video that gives a proper description of them, like just a definition for what they all do, because I know it's a lot to digest right now. So transaction department approval then is the manager of the department that is tagged within the transaction. So it doesn't matter who puts in the transaction, it goes by the department that's tagged in the transaction. So who's the manager of that department? That's the person that's going to be the approver. And then transaction location department. So the location that is tagged within the transaction, the approver is going to be the manager of that location. And then the last one is transaction project manager approval. So the project that is selected in the transaction, who is the project manager on that project, the approvals will go to them. So let's just take a look at our time module. We'll go into our employees setup. So if I edit here beside one of my employees, I do have the option to select a manager for that employee. So let's say if we were doing employee manager approval and we had a manager assigned here, John Carson, for instance, then when that approval policy is in place, John Carson is going to get the approvals whenever Robert Jones puts in transactions. So let's say that's not there, but Robert Jones has the construction operations department tagged in their employee file. So the manager of construction operations, I think it's actually Robert Jones. No, it's Dennis Sanford. So the manager of the department tagged for Robert Jones. So then when Robert Jones puts in a transaction, it goes to Dennis Sanford for approval when it is a department approval. So department approval is going to go to Dennis Sanford. Okay, so the next one then is the transaction department approval. So when I'm putting in my vendor invoice and I'm tagging in the dimensions the department, so in my coding down here, I can put in a department. Who is the manager of that department? That's who the approvals will go to. And then if I do transaction location approval, it's going to be the manager of the location. So let's say for Timberline GC, who is the manager for Timberline GC? So there's no manager on this, but obviously if you were using that approval policy, you would have a manager on your locations, and that's how it would get routed for approval. And then transaction project manager approval is going to be whichever project you select on the transaction, who the manager of that project is going to get the approvals for those transactions. So they're the different types. I know that's a lot to take in, and they're similar but a little bit different. So I'll do a list at the end of this to just kind of go into that in more detail and really lay it out for you. And that should pop up at the end of this video. So there are your purchasing approvals. You do have to remember, of course, once you enable it, that you have to apply the permissions or make sure that you have those managers put in the correct places for that to get routed correctly. And then I do, of course, recommend testing this in your implementation environment to make sure that it's all going to the right place. And then if you have the email notifications turned on, then the approver will get an email notification to tell them that, you have to come into the system and do those approvals. And then that's going to be in the purchasing module, all tab approve transactions. And when they come in here, then they'll have the option to either approve or decline. They can select all up here at the top if they have several. And, they can put notes in on the transactions as well to say, why they're declining it. You can do approvals if you're an employee user, but with the limitations of employee users, they won't be able to edit the transactions. They'll only be able to decline them if there's an error, and then they will have to put a note on it to say, this is wrong, this is what you have to change. But if you were a project manager or business user, you'd be able to make those edits yourself. So that is the purchasing approvals. I'll put the list at the end of this to make that a bit more clear for all the different approval policies. And then if you're, trying to set this up and you're not fully getting it, then of course you can hop in a Q&A and get our help with that. And then these are the policies that are in place for Intacct. And then if you need a more robust approval policy than that and Intacct is not doing it for you, then you can reach out about getting an integration that has a better, more robust approval policy in place. In this, we'll take a look at some of this other transaction activity you can do within purchasing. So if you've set up approvals like we went through in the last video, and there's something for you to approve in the system, you would come into this approve transaction section and you would see any of the invoices that have pushed through for approval. And you can view them, check to make sure that everything is correct, and then you can either approve or decline. If you have email notifications set up, you'll get an email notification to tell you that there is transactions in the system for you to come in and approve. So it's within the purchasing module under other transaction activity, approve transactions. From here then, if there was several, you could select all of them up here and you could mass approve or mass decline. And then obviously you can go in and view them to make sure they're correct, and you can just hit approve. It gives you an option to put in a comments box and you hit approve, and then that means that that's going to post through. So the next thing that we want to look at then is if you want to process transactions. So let's say you have multiple POs from the same vendor and you want to create one invoice with all of those POs. So there is a configuration setting that you would have to turn on for that. So in the purchasing setup configuration, in the enable functionality section, there is this button that you'd have to turn on for enable advanced processing. So let's see what that does then. So if I go back to my entity level, I'm going to hit process transactions. And I'm going to say that I want to create a purchasing invoice from purchase orders. And then if you know the vendor, the particular vendor, you would put that in as well. I want to process it by transaction, and I am going to merge them into one transaction. So creating a purchasing invoice based off of multiple purchase orders, I want to merge them into one invoice. So I'm going to hit view here, and it should bring up the transactions that I have. So I have 3 available transactions that I can merge. So there's 3 POs for my vendor frameworks. I can select all 3 of them, and then I can create. So I do need to put in my vendor document number at this point because I'm creating an invoice. I'm just going to put in something there. And then the date is going to default as today. So create then merging those 3 transactions into one invoice. That's a nice handy process if somebody needs that. So it's going to bring me in here to create that. And then, you can put in additional coding if you need to and hit post. And that's going to post through. So that is process transactions and how that works. And then also within your other transaction activity, you can do recurring transactions. So I'm not sure how many scenarios that you would have where that would come up, but you do have to select the document type that you want to be recurring. So let's say you have vendor invoice and it happens every month. You can pick that document type, apply it, put in the information that you want to code to. Anything with the red asterisk is required. And then on the schedule tab, you say the start date for when you want this to begin. So let's say May 30th, you want to repeat it by months and you want to do that every 1 month. And then when do you want to end it? So I'm going to end it after 10 occurrences. So there's 10 months of this recurring vendor invoice that I'm doing. And obviously you have the different options here for days, weeks, etc. So you can play around with that schedule if that is something that you have the need for. So recurring transactions, you first select the document type and then put in the information for the actual transaction and then set up the schedule. Also, in this other transaction activity, you can hit view transactions, which will show you all of the transactions within the purchasing module. So here you have, your orders, your invoices, and you can go specifically into vendor invoices or subcontract invoices and just view the transactions for that particular transaction definition. Or you can go into view transactions. It's going to show you all of the different types of purchasing transactions. So you can see purchase invoice, vendor invoice, change orders, etc. So if it made more sense for you to come in and search from here, then that is something that you could do. So view transactions is going to show you all of the purchasing transactions. This other section then here for print or email transactions. So if you want to send out in bulk from purchasing, then this is something that you can do. So who are you sending it from? That can be changed, and we can go through different time periods here to bring up our documents. Let me do current year just to make sure that something comes up. You can put in filters. As always, these are out of the box and we can't edit the filters that are here. We can only customize using what's already here. You can add in additional transaction types. So let me just hit all. And then, you can choose the email template. You can override the email template that you're sending out as well. So let me view here and it'll bring up all the transactions that I have and I can just send them out of the system then. So if there was an email address on the vendor, it would populate in here. Otherwise, you can just type it in, separate them by a comma or a semicolon and you can CC or BCC. If you wanted to just print them, you can select that here. And then if you want to email, obviously put in the email address and then hit email and then print or email that out of the system. So that's just printing or emailing in bulk from the purchasing module. And that's all of the other transaction activity we're going to go through in this video. And in the next, we'll just take a quick look at compliance. Okay, so to round out this section, we're just going to take a look at what's left within the purchasing module that we haven't covered yet. So on the setup tab, you can see that there's a tax section down here. And we do have a complete set of videos that show you how to get your taxes set up. So if you have the need to use taxes with either purchasing or order entry, go ahead and watch those videos, try and get them set up in your implementation instance. And if you need additional help with that, obviously, of course, you can put in a ticket and schedule a one-on-one or hop on a Q&A and ask some questions about that. Vendor compliance also is here in the setup tab, and we do also have a bunch of videos that go through how to get that set up, but you will have compliance definitions, say based off your compliance category, whether it be insurance, lien waivers, or miscellaneous, and then you have compliance types that are linked to those definitions, which is where you'll apply your printed document template. So where do the actual compliance records live then? They're here on your all tab and it's compliance records. So let me just show you a template that I have in the system here. So if I come into my records, I have my lien waiver here. And if I go print or email and I take a look at that, here is just like a typical example of a lien waiver that we have that we could put into the system for you. Obviously, you'll have your own and you'll want to get it as close as possible to that, but it's basically going to be these same kind of fields. You know, you want to pull in subcontractor project amount, etc. So they live within the purchasing module, compliance records, your setup is here, compliance definition, compliance types. So the records for compliance are always, always, always driven by the purchasing module. If you have bills going directly into AP, you will not be able to generate lien waiver records for bills that go directly into AP. It's driven by the purchasing module. So you may need to be setting up a workflow called vendor invoice or something like that if you have bills that are going in that are not subcontract invoices or purchasing invoice and you want to generate lien waiver records for that. So that is pretty much rounding out everything that there is in the purchasing module. Of course, if you have additional questions, please do hop on a Q&A. There are every day. So don't be afraid to hop in there and ask some questions.